On a warm summer evening, July 23, 2020, a sudden burst of panic swept through a quiet Orlando neighborhood. A frantic 911 call pierced the calm, with a distressed voice on the other end. Fire weapon sounds, multiple ones, the caller reported. At least 8 or 10, maybe more. The operator tried to gather more details, but the caller hadn't seen anything, just the chilling sounds of danger. By the time officers arrived at the scene, the neighborhood was eerily still. Inside a white Toyota, they made a grim discovery: the lifeless body of 41-year-old Eloy Lebron. The fire weapon had claimed another life, and now the investigation had begun. Detectives quickly turned to the area's surveillance cameras, searching for any clue that might point them toward the culprits. Soon, footage emerged, grainy yet crucial, showing a white Saturn speeding away from the scene shortly after the shots were fired. Not long after, the same vehicle was captured on another camera at an apartment complex, where 2 young women, later identified as 19-year-olds Marky Hamilton and Jeria Shield, were seen stepping out of the car. Suspicions grew as the detectives dug deeper into the lives of these 2 women. The police decided to interview a family member who knew them well, hoping she might hold the key to unraveling the mystery. They approached her carefully, mindful of how close she was to the suspects. "When you woke up yesterday, what time was it?" the investigator asked. "About 10, she replied nervously. "And when you left for work at 11, were the girls home?" "No, the car wasn't there either," she confirmed, her tone wavering. The investigators pressed on, aware of the delicate balance between coaxing out the truth and pushing too hard. They emphasized the seriousness of the situation, the weight of a life lost, and the potential consequences of withholding information. But despite their efforts, the family member offered little in the way of new leads. Their next step was to speak with a witness who had seen the incident unfold. He described a chaotic scene where both the driver and the passenger fired their weapons, unleashing a storm of violence. "They were steady shooting, even as they turned the car," the witness recalled. "The passenger leaned out, firing over the hood." The witness's testimony complicated things further. From his vantage point, it seemed like both shooters were men, leaving detectives to wonder: could Marquis and Jeria have been mere passengers in the car during the deadly exchange? With these conflicting details, the case teetered on uncertainty. The detectives knew one thing for sure: the truth was tangled in the stories of those 2 women and the fast-moving events that led to Eloy Lebron's death. As the investigation deepened, detectives started to believe that Marky Hamilton and Jeria Shield might be shielding someone, perhaps the men involved in the crime. With this suspicion, they decided it was time to bring both women in for questioning. Marquis was up first. The atmosphere was tense as the interview began. The detective leaned in, his tone calm but firm. "I want to make sure you understand your rights. Okay? We'll go over everything again, and hopefully we can figure out where to go from here," he explained. Marquis nodded quietly. "Did Detective Overfield explain why you're here?" the detective asked. "No, he didn't," Marquis responded, frustration evident in her voice. "He came to my mom's job, told her my phone was released, and I could come pick it up. But something didn't feel right. Then, not long after, they came rushing to the house. It wasn't what I expected." She paused, clearly upset. "Why couldn't they just tell my mom I had a warrant? Why lie about picking up a phone? I mean, I knew something was up. Nobody just gives your phone back like that. I wasn't even worried about the phone. I got a new one." The detective listened patiently, nodding as she vented. He saw an opportunity to pivot the conversation back to the investigation. "Look, I get it," he said, "but we're here now. And the truth is, when someone's life is taken, it doesn't just go away. We work around the clock, just like we would for your family if they were in this situation. We owe it to the victim's family to find answers." Marquis' frustration shifted to defensiveness. "I already told you everything I know. I shouldn't have been there, I get that. But you're acting like I fired the weapon, which I didn't. I've never pulled a trigger in my life." The detective leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. "Listen, I know you didn't do it. I looked at you and I looked at Jeria and I said, girls don't do stuff like this. If anything, girls argue, they go on social media, they scrap it out. That's how it goes, right? Marquis didn't respond, her eyes steady but unsure of where this was leading. But, the detective continued, his voice lowering, we have evidence, strong evidence, and the shots came from the car you were in, the car we found. Do you understand what that means? She stiffened at the mention of evidence, her face a mix of confusion and disbelief. What evidence? She asked, her voice rising slightly. The detective sighed. I'm trying to help you understand how serious this is. The proof we have, it's solid. It's not just speculation. 2 people fired from that car. The car you owned, Marquis. And yes, we can prove that. His words hung in the air. Marquis shifted uncomfortably in her seat, sensing that whatever was coming next could determine her fate. The detective leaned back slightly. I'm not here to mess with you. I'm telling you, the evidence is there. You'll see it soon enough, through witness statements and more. For the first time, Marquis' confidence seemed to falter. She knew the weight of the situation, but now it felt heavier, more real. The truth wasn't something she could run from anymore. She was in the middle of it, and the only way out was through the truth. One of the primary reasons suspects talk to police is out of curiosity, an intense need to understand what the authorities know. This gives them the chance to craft their own version of events that fits the evidence. Marquis was no exception. She wanted to know what the police had on her, but the detective knew that he needed to be careful. Revealing too much could give Marquis the opportunity to twist the truth. Yet, he had to convince her that the evidence against her and her cousin Jeria was strong without revealing critical details. Sitting across from her, the detective tried to strike a balance between pressing her for the truth and offering reassurance. Is the testimony strong? He began. Is the evidence strong against you too for taking a life? Marquis leaned in, her guard slightly lowered. Is it? She asked cautiously. Yes, it's incredibly strong. So strong, or else you wouldn't be sitting here right now. And your cousin is about to be in this same room. This isn't looking good for either of you. He continued, his voice steady but firm. Now, I've been doing this for 10 years, and I'd be very surprised if either of you pulled the trigger. I've seen people like you, young, ambitious, with jobs, futures, and plans. Why would you throw that all away? You might smoke a little cannabis, hang out with these guys, your boyfriends, we understand that. But we know more than you think. We verified where your boyfriend was. We tracked your phone, and everything checks out. Marquis' face remained tense as the detective spoke, unsure of how much he really knew. The problem is, the detective continued, your phone also backed up something else. You were there when the shots were fired. You and Jeria both had such detailed information that only someone who was present could know. It wasn't something you could have heard from the guys afterward. You had to have been there. I told you I was there, Marquis admitted, her voice growing defensive. I know, the detective replied, and I appreciate that honesty. You and your cousin have been straight with us about that. But what we can't get past is how those shots came from your car. You say you were in the passenger seat and Jeria was driving. So if neither of you fired, who did? Marquis looked down, frustrated. No shots came from my car. Why would I risk everything for some guys? I've got a future. I'm in love, sure, but I'm 18. I'm not throwing my life away for anyone. The detective nodded, almost sympathetically. I get that, and it's not your boyfriend we're worried about. We've spoken to him. He wasn't even there. He paused before pressing on. But someone else was, and that's what we need to talk about. Scotty Burnett, also known as Pimpin, and Reggie were in that car with you, weren't they? That's what you just said. Marquis hesitated for a moment, realizing what she had let slip. That's what I heard, she quickly added, trying to backtrack. I wasn't with them at McDonald's. They picked me up after. The detective leaned in. So who was with them at McDonald's? Then? Marquis, shifting in her seat, reluctantly answered, her, Pimpin, and Reggie. That's what Jeria told me. With this admission, Marquis placed herself in the middle of a situation that was spiraling beyond her control. The detective seized on her uncertainty. So you admit you were in the area when the shots were fired, but you claim you didn't pull the trigger. You said you got scared and went to do laundry after hearing the shots. The detective summarized. For the next hour, the detective meticulously laid out the pieces of evidence, hoping to get Marquis to open up. But as she spoke, detailing her story, a nagging suspicion grew in his mind. Maybe the life-taker wasn't someone outside the car. Maybe the life-taker was sitting right in front of him. You're telling me that you and Jeria were the only ones in the car? He asked, his eyes narrowing. Yeah, we were, she replied. The detective's voice lowered. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm starting to think you're not telling me everything. Maybe you're tougher than you're letting on. Maybe you're the one who pulled the trigger. Marquis shot back quickly. Why would I do that? I'm not doing anyone's dirty work, especially for something like this. I have enough sense not to ruin my life. The detective leaned back, scrutinizing her carefully. Unless you did it for yourself, or your cousin. As the conversation wore on, the detective was left with the unsettling realization that Marquis might be far more involved than she was letting on. When the detective finally told Marquis she might be considered a suspect, her demeanor shifted drastically. The calm, almost assured young woman who had been holding her ground now seemed uneasy. Her confidence gave way to nervousness, and she began to rock back and forth in her seat. As the reality of the situation started to sink in, she stumbled over her words, no longer speaking with the same clarity as before. I'm missing it. You think I don't get it? 100%. I get it, Marquis muttered, her voice shaky. The detective could see the crack in her composure. He continued, pushing gently but firmly, knowing this was the moment he could get through to her. I wouldn't stick my hand out the window to fire a weapon, she stammered, rocking a little more. I got a tattoo. It would have identified me. At that moment, Marquis made a significant mistake. She thought her defense was solid. After all, if she had stuck her arm out the window to fire the weapon, someone would have seen her tattoo and identified her. But she hadn't considered one key detail, and the detective was quick to catch it. You just said something important, the detective said, leaning in. You're saying you wouldn't fire a weapon because your tattoo would give you away. But didn't you just get that tattoo a few weeks ago? Marquis blinked, momentarily thrown off guard. Yeah, I just got this one a few weeks ago, she admitted. Right? The detective nodded. So, when the shots were fired, you didn't have that tattoo yet, did you? Marquis hesitated. No, I didn't have this one, she mumbled. The detective pressed on, driving his point home. Exactly. So, if you didn't have that tattoo when the shooting happened, it wouldn't have identified you. But you just said it would, which means you're thinking about how you could have been identified. That's telling me something. Marquis, visibly nervous now, tried to correct herself. I'm just saying, I wouldn't fire a weapon out the car. It's not something I'd do. The detective didn't let up. So if you didn't fire the weapon, who did? You said it was just you and Jeria in the car. If neither of you pulled the trigger, then who did? Marquis continued to stumble through her responses, her initial confidence now completely gone. She seemed unsure of what to say next, as the detective's words sank in deeper. Look, the detective said, trying to appeal to her. I've been doing this a long time. It's just hard to believe that girls like you and Jeria would be involved in something like this. But maybe I've been wrong. Maybe you two handled the situation yourselves because, like you said, you're not going to do someone else's dirty work. Marquis was silent for a moment, her mind racing as she tried to find a way out of the situation. But the detective's words kept coming, the weight of the evidence and her own admissions piling on. We've been wrong before, the detective continued almost to himself. But if you were in that car and you know what happened, now's the time to tell us, because the evidence is strong and we're going to present it. But if there's more to this, if there's a reason this happened, now is your chance to speak up. Marquis rocked back and forth, her nerves visibly fraying. The detective watched her carefully, waiting for her next move. As the interrogation pressed on, the detective worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle that had been unraveling before him. For a long time, there had been one piece missing, something that hadn't quite fit. But now, with Marquis' slip about her tattoo, everything started to fall into place. The case was coming together, and the truth was beginning to reveal itself. Now that you've mentioned the tattoo, the detective began, leaning in. I think I see it more clearly. You didn't have it at the time of the shooting, did you? Marquis, visibly uncomfortable, rocked back and forth, stumbling over her words. That was crazy. Did I do anything like that? I didn't, she mumbled, her earlier confidence crumbling. The detective seized the moment. I didn't think so either, until you said something about that tattoo. You see, I've been talking to Detective Sprague and Overfield, and the details of what you've said, small things, don't quite line up. You're saying the shots didn't come from your car, but the evidence tells us otherwise. Marquis nervously protested. But if I had fired the weapon, I would have had to fire a weapon over my cousin's face, and that doesn't make any sense. I wouldn't be able to see anything. It would just be a waste of bullets. But in saying that, Marquis had made another crucial mistake. Not only had she implied she had the tattoo earlier than she actually did, but she also described how she would have shot out of the vehicle. Her description eerily matched what the witness had told detectives earlier. See, the detective said. The way you're describing it, that's exactly what the witness saw. You just told us what you did. Marquis looked increasingly agitated. I'm not doing anyone else's dirty work, she muttered under her breath, the reality of the situation weighing heavily on her. The detective pressed further. If the shots didn't come from you, then who fired them? You're saying it was just you and Jeria in the car. So if neither of you pulled the trigger, who did? Marquis, cornered, began to unravel. We didn't fire any shots. I'm not about to throw away my whole future for this. The detective leaned back, letting her words hang in the air for a moment. Listen, you're smart. You had a bright future ahead of you, but the decisions you make now can change everything. People make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes aren't intentional. But if this was a case of sending a message or scaring someone, now's the time to say it. Marquis shook her head, still holding on. But there were no shots fired. You want me to admit to something I didn't do. The detective remained firm. I don't want you to admit to something you didn't do. But the evidence we have, witnesses, video footage, GPS data, it all points to those shots coming from your car. At this point, Marquis tried one last tactic. Do you have the fire weapon? Was there residue found on the top of my car? The detective paused. We don't always need the weapon. Most of the time, we don't find it. But that doesn't change the fact that everything else points back to you. Frustrated, Marquis ended the conversation. If we're done here, I'm ready to go. The detective sighed, his tone shifting to one of disappointment. What I was hoping to hear from you was some remorse, maybe an apology for what happened to the victim's family. But instead, I'm hearing nothing. No responsibility. Marquis remained silent. I don't have any responsibility for this. I didn't do it. With that, the interview ended, and the detective left the room. But the investigation wasn't over yet. Now, it was time to interview Jeria Shield, to hear her side of the story. As Jeria was brought in, she immediately voiced her frustration. Y'all should have been talking to me first. You pulled me over. I've been here for hours. This doesn't make any sense. The detectives listened patiently, then began their questioning. Jeria's story closely matched Marquis, but there was one detail that stood out. She mentioned she wanted to join the military one day, possibly even become a sniper, because she believed in doing the right thing. I believe in honesty, Jeria said. But when the detectives asked if she or Marquis had fired the shots, her response was a firm no. Why would I fire a weapon someone for no reason? She asked, bewildered by the accusation. But the detectives weren't buying it. Then why do people keep telling us that all the gunshots came from your car? That the front seat passenger and driver were the ones who fired? Jeria shook her head. That doesn't make sense. I never owned or touched a weapon. After hours of interrogation, the detectives felt confident they had their suspects. Both Marquis and Jeria were arrested, facing charges of manslaughter with a firearm. Prosecutors believed that the victim was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in a crossfire he never saw coming. For now, both women were out on bail, awaiting trial. Whether they would face justice or not, only time would tell. As the investigation continues, the truth behind Eloy Lebron's tragic death may soon come to light. But the chilling events of that summer evening will forever leave a mark. What really happened? Only time will tell. If you want to follow more gripping stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and stay tuned for more real-life mysteries that keep you on the edge of your seat. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.